Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant voice of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Glad to be with you. Let's get right into it. There's a lot of noise going on concerning Donald Trump. That's nothing new. One of the bigger stories recently is a controversy about his call to the widow of a fallen soldier. Happens to be a black soldier. And the charge of being insensitive, heartless, and cruel. The soldier's name was LaDavid Johnson. The call was to his widow, Maisha Johnson, and it is said that he made insensitive remarks. And here is how Frederica Wilson, who is front and center in this controversy as criticizing the president for his words, this is how she responded back on the 18th of October to an interview, or during an interview, regarding the phone call.
I have to ask you, are you sure you heard what he said, that the president said he knew what he was signing up for? You heard that?
Yeah, he said that. You know, to me, that is something that you can say in a conversation, but you shouldn't say that to a grieving widow. And everyone knows when you go to war, you could possibly not come back alive, but you don't remind the grieving widow of that. It's so insensitive. So insensitive. He should not have said that, and he shouldn't have said it. That is what stood out in my mind. Now, I didn't hear the entire conversation, but when I tried to find out what the entire conversation was, she said, I just can't remember everything that he said, but that stood out in everyone's heart in the car. You don't say that. He is the President of the United States. This is a soldier who gave his life for his country. He is a hero in our minds, in our community's minds. That is an insult to the entire Miami Gardens community, to entire District 24, to Miami-Dade County, and to this nation. And I hope he did not say that to the other three families that he called.
Congresswoman Wilson, this is direct when you heard that from the grieving widow, that he knew what he signed up for?
Yes.
So our understanding was a 5-minute conversation. He expressed his condolences.
But by the way, you know, it's almost like if you are, well, you understand. I mean, I don't have to interpret that. That is.
But you didn't hear it from her. You heard it through the phone.
I heard him saying it through the phone. He was on the speakerphone.
Oh, he was on speakerphone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So many interesting things in that conversation. First of all, there's the excerpting. He knew what he was signing up for. Now, there are publications out there, little documents and snippets in social media that carry more, quote unquote, than that little quote, which is he knew what he signed up for, yet he went and did it anyway to protect us, etc., so on. I can excerpt anything and make anyone look good or bad. And that seems to be what the Congresswoman did. She noticed that she said she didn't hear the entire conversation. So how does she know what happened? And when asked to explain things, she basically said, well, I don't need to explain. You guys understand, I don't need to explain. Yes, we do need an explanation, particularly from someone like Frederica Wilson, who is so concerned about the military when they die, but she's not concerned about those when they live. Check out her voting record on anything involving the military or veterans. She is an enemy of their interests. But that is where we got to this point of what? Donald Trump is insane. Here is the problem with that. For you to come to the conclusion that Donald Trump is insensitive to widows, to black women in particular, because the black community, as you can imagine, is going crazy. Oh, he said this to a black woman, to the wife of a fallen black soldier. He wouldn't have said that to. Yeah, okay. If you really want to go down that road with Donald Trump, you better back yourself up and talk about Donald Trump and Jennifer Hudson. In 2008, I believe, Jennifer Hudson had members of her family murdered. Her mother, I believe a nephew, and I think a sibling. And in the wake of that, everybody had all this sympathy toward her. But according to Access Hollywood, November 11th of 2008, in the wake of her family tragedy, Jennifer Hudson has received a helping hand from a very unlikely source, Donald Trump. Jennifer and some of her family members have been staying at the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago, and Trump has been picking up the tab. They are safe, Trump told people on Monday night. She's a great girl and we're protecting them well. Yes, he also provided security for members of her family out of his own pocket, by the way. According to E! Online, Hudson has been staying in the hotel since arriving on October 24th, the day her mother, Darnell Donerson, and brother Jason Hudson were found murdered and her nephew, Julian King, was found missing. Since checking in the day they were killed, Donald Trump started putting her up in his hotel at his cost and providing security. Since checking into the hotel, the Oscar winner and former American Idol star has rarely left the hotel. She's still in shock. Stop. But Donald Trump is a racist. But Donald Trump is insensitive. Then there is the tale of the 10 family. This from the Times of Israel, August of 2015. For the tale of a Jewish child saved by Trump, and it mentions that there's a tragic end because 10 years after Donald Trump did a wonderful thing for this family, unfortunately the child passed away. The billionaire came to the rescue of the 10 family and whisked their ailing son Andrew from L.A. to New York on a private jet in 1988. Rabbi Harold Hershey Ten and his wife Judy were at their wits' end and needed to get their 3-year-old son Andrew to New York City from L.A. for medical treatment. Toddler suffered from a rare and undiagnosed breathing illness. But commercial airlines declined to fly Andrew, who couldn't leave home without several pieces of medical equipment, including a portable oxygen tank and suction machine. Desperate for help, the family called on Trump, who agreed to provide his private Boeing 727. Once the plane landed in LaGuardia, Andrew was whisked to the Schneider Children's Hospital of Long Island Jewish Medical Center. In the story, Andrew's father said, Mr. Trump did not hesitate when we called him up. He said, yes, I'll send my plane out. Donald Trump wasn't running for anything in 1988. I don't believe he was on television in 1988. I don't think anybody was looking for publicity for Donald Trump in 1988. Are you catching my drift here? What you want me to believe now is because a congresswoman who hates Donald Trump and does not support the military, you want me to take her word that Donald Trump, who has never shown any animosity toward black females, and as a matter of fact gone out of his way to help black females and other people in trouble when he did not have to, all of a sudden he was disrespectful to someone who was grieving. Okay. What about the people who are going through things with respect to the recent spate of hurricanes that hit the U.S.? What about what happened in Houston? He ran into some people in Houston. Here's how a local ABC affiliate reported on his visit.
Hey, can you handle this?
President Trump arrives in Houston to show his support. At the NRC Center, he provides kisses and comfort at the Kids Center, filled with those forced to evacuate due to Hurricane Harvey.
We're very happy with the way everything's going. A lot of love. As tough as this was, it's been a wonderful thing. I think even for the country to watch and for the world to watch.
Jana Miles and Lakeisha Collins snapped this selfie after talking with the president.
He really did say, yes, we just want to get the help that we needed.
And how'd that make you feel?
It made me feel wonderful.
I had a different opinion of him, and now I think that he's a wonderful man.
The president came here where people are serving food and decided to serve some meals himself.
Joe Boyd says this lunch was handed to him by the commander-in-chief.
I'm really appreciating and thankful.
My husband's 73 years old, and if he died and went to heaven today, we got to see President Trump.
Lyndon Rose spoke to the First Lady and the President.
A lot of people do it for photo op. I really thought that he was sincere.
The President also met with Texas's top elected leaders and says they'll work together on a quick recovery.
They say 2 years, 3 years. I think that, because this is Texas, you'll probably do it in 6 months. I have a feeling here.
The president has asked Congress for nearly $8 billion in federal assistance for the people here. That's widely expected to be approved. In Houston, Alex Michelson, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
The woman who said she had a different opinion of him, but now thinks after meeting him that he's a wonderful man, was a black woman. And the woman who spoke directly before her was also a black woman. They are the ones who took a selfie with Donald Trump and published that on social media. How many folks out there in the throes of their tragedy when they're trying to recover found a president who so impressed them and was so humble as to be willing to take a selfie with them? Where's the Secret Service? Where's all these people? Excuse me. But he hates blacks. He's racist. He's terrible. Here is the interesting thing. I have yet to hear from any black person who has had a one-on-one conversation with Donald Trump walk away and then continuing to talk about him being a racist. I haven't heard it. Going on with the idea of how Trump is with people in tough situations, these are not necessarily black people, they are people of color, but here is how the congresswoman who represents Puerto Rico, which happens to be the largest congressional district in these United States, by the way, here's what she had to say. This is apart from what the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico has to say, and she's basically out there spinning off the deep end. But here is what the congresswoman who represents all of Puerto Rico has had to say about Donald Trump and his administration in the wake of the hurricanes.
I also want to thank your congresswoman, who actually represents the largest number of people of any congressperson in the United States. I know that. It's 3.5 million people, Jennifer, right? So Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who I've watched the other day, and she was saying such nice things about all of the people that have worked so hard Jennifer, do you think you could say a little bit what you said about us today? And it's not about me. It's about these incredible people from the military to FEMA, the first responders. I mean, I've never seen people working so hard in my life. Perhaps you could say?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Congresswoman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first thing is that before we were hit by Maria, we were hit by Hurricane Irma. And during that time, before the hurricane, it was FEMA acting together with a lot of employees. More than 4,000 people were here in the island for the different branches of the military. HHS, Navy, Army, FEMA, and all the staff working together before the hurricane hit. They were here before, during, after the first hurricane, and they continued to stay on the island, boots on the ground, during Maria. Same thing. I think we never got the level of communication between the federal government and the local government like never before. And we are in the path of the hurricane. So we are used to receiving hurricanes, but never before a Category 5. The amount of devastation, it's unheard of. But during all this time, we got the federal government by our side, doing the job, with the people here, like you in the military, doing all that is being asked, all the questions and requests that the governor did. The president and his cabinet accomplished it and send more people, and it's continued to send in more people, trucks, drivers, and resources. Thank you, Mr. President, for all you've been doing for the island.
Well, I want to thank you because you were really generous, and I saw those comments, and everybody saw those comments, and we really appreciate it. And you know, it's so important when you have men and women that have worked so hard and so long, and many of them came from 2 other catastrophic hurricanes. I mean, they came from Texas, they came from Louisiana, they came from Florida, and there was no, how many nights arrest have you gotten? 0 in the last month, right?
This is day 43.
Yeah, all right, well, we're going to keep them for another couple of weeks, and by that time, I think, you know, well, we, come here. Special guy, I will tell you, special. Really good. Really good.
Well, let me see. They're not white nationalists. They're not waving the Confederate flag. And truth of the matter is, though they are American citizens, they do not even belong to a united state. They belong to a territory. And they're just, you know, they're brown people, even though, of course, Puerto Rico is 75% white. But Donald Trump is not heartless. He's not showing cruelty. As a matter of fact, before the trouble even started, he had his administration acting to help Puerto Rico even before the damage began. Wow. Back to black women, though. Natasha De Alencar is a black woman who was married to a non-black man who died in Afghanistan as part of the U.S. military. She chose to release the full audio of her conversation with Donald Trump. I won't play that. I'll let you find that on your own. But she also made this audio as part of her response to the Trump call that she received during her time of mourning.
I do remember that conversation. It was the day after I came home from my husband's dignified return home to American soil. And right when I came home, the COA that was dealing with our family, the casualty officer, said that there was someone on the phone. And the cool thing about it was, I guess President Trump was maybe handling so many things because he has a lot going on, but his assistant was very adamant. They told me not to, hold on to the phone. Don't hang up. He really wants to speak to you. And he was taking care of business, and maybe it was 15, 20 minutes. Me and my kids sat in the living room, and we held on, and he picked up. And I was so, set back because he knew everything about my husband. He knew from the time he entered. He knew about the awards. He knew everything. And he told me before he makes phone calls, which is so heartfelt, and it's a tragedy to the families that he's calling, he likes to do the research and the homework on that soldier who made the ultimate sacrifice. So I was very impressed that he had took that time out to learn every little bit of thing about my husband, and he kind of got like a little small glimpse of how important of a person he was, not only to our country, but to our little small world here, our home. And he took it a step further because then he started speaking of my kids. He knew my kids' names. He knew their age. He knew my son was in college on a scholarship. So that conversation I had with Trump, I remember. I will always remember because he's the president. He's the commander-in-chief. He has a lot of things to do. But at that moment when my world was upside down and me and my kids didn't know which way we were going, it felt like I was talking to just like a regular human, like just like a regular person, an everyday person, a person who don't have the whole world to deal with. He just sounded like somebody who was somebody's husband, somebody's dad. So he put himself in that position for 2 seconds, and it was heartfelt that the 2 seconds that he felt, he was able to know how what we were going through, or he just wanted to send his condolences because he knows it's a void. So it's a conversation that I do remember, and it meant the life to my whole family. It really did.
So let me get this straight. What the mainstream media and progressives, particularly black progressives, would want you to believe is that the same guy who helped Jennifer Hudson after her family tragedy, the same guy who gave his private jet to a family needing to transport their then toddler child cross country for medical treatment, the same guy who won over black women in Houston during a visit to a hurricane relief center, the same guy who goes to Puerto Rico, and despite the negative comments of one political individual, you don't find a whole bunch of people in Puerto Rico saying anything bad about the Trump administration. And, oh, by the way, the same guy who made the call to Natasha De Alencar, and she came back and told you that it was a very positive conversation. You want me to believe that that same guy disrespected this widow. I'm not buying it. You've lied too many times. If you want to tell me that your touchstone of truth is Frederica Wilson, who has as much contempt for the military as anybody who can and actually serve in Congress? No, sir. You're lying. Donald Trump is a lot of things, but he does not have a history of cruelty or heartlessness to people facing tough situations. Not him. Now, if you had said this about Barack Hussein Obama, because we still haven't heard about him doing anything for the... Well, never mind. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet Conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, in the tradition of never letting a crisis go to waste, the Weinstein or Harvey Weinstein debacle has allowed the progressives of a feminist bent to start capitalizing so they can start their decades-long or restart or re-energize their decades-long quest to diminish men in American society. And it is being done under the hashtag #MeToo. So women are now coming out of the woodwork with all their tales of sexual assault against nameless and faceless men. They won't say who they are. And what they're doing, of course, is depriving all men the right to be innocent until proven guilty, because all these allegations they make are unproven. And the whole idea is that if enough women say that there's something bad going on, then no one, anywhere, at any time, should have any further doubt that something bad is going on, because enough women have said it. Now, of course, there are some men who have said it. Most notably, as I understand it, Terry Crews, who went on a 16-part tweet, I believe it was, to talk about how somebody grabbed him in front of his wife, and he took it. Man, what do? You risk your position in the business. Okay, so we know the price of your integrity. Got it. Tom Jones is talking around something that happened to him in decades past. So there are some men. But the whole idea is to get a groundswell of grassroots women telling the world that, you know what, it's not just them, it's hashtag Me Too. Here's what the New York Times put out on the 20th of October. They put a video out where they had a montage of women speaking about their experiences, all coming under the hashtag of Me Too.
I was molested by a father of my elementary school best friend.
The third time was my boss actually having his hands on me.
It was in between, my first years at college.
At the first year of college, I met my boyfriend.
I woke up in the middle of the night. I'm not quite sure what time it was, but to him, his hands on me and beginning to fondle me.
So basically, he walked by me in his office, and he grabbed me around the waist and had his hand right underneath my breast.
About 2 a.m., I heard him coming back home. He started punching me really strongly with his fists.
It wasn't unusual, but this one particular person would take me out on different assignments, even though I wasn't in his department. And he started reaching over to me and caressing my hair and telling me how beautiful I was.
When women say when things happen to them, they completely freeze. And it's true. It's absolutely true. You feel just almost outside of your body.
I felt I was bleeding, but at the same time, I tried really hard to stay conscious.
Stood up abruptly and I started running back down the trail because, again, we were in the middle of nowhere.
I thought we had a really good relationship and I trusted him. So this felt like something that it was just awful.
Fortunately, our neighbor heard that something is going on and called the police.
So I contacted my supervisor and I said, this is what happened. I just want you to know. And she told me, oh, we've had complaints about this type of thing with him before.
Really just started asking the company to move me. And he was important enough in the company that they didn't want to do that.
So, this is probably the first time I've ever really talked about it fully publicly.
I have never talked about my case in public. I don't think even my coworkers know what I went through.
The power of silence protects perpetrators and protects a system. And the only thing that combats silence is speaking up.
So I decided to put it on Facebook because I felt like it was just time for women to speak up.
It's tough, but it's necessary. I mean, it's the only way that anything can be done and anything can change is by talking about it.
And so for me, I found real power in saying, you know what, this happened to me too.
The lies that are there and masked in pretty emotional terms so that they become acceptable. Let's deal with some of that. Well, the silence protects the system. True. And the way to combat the silence, stop. The problem isn't the silence. The problem is the system. The way you combat a corrupt system is to bring it to account. Unsubstantiated allegations never bring a system or an individual to account. Speaking out against no one in particular and not calling them by name does not make anyone accountable. All it does is paint everyone with a broad brush and make them all guilty by proxy. A man did this to me. Well, I heard about this girl who said Me Too, and she described something that sounded like the way you talk to me. You must be an abuser. Really? Because that's where this heads. That's where this leads. This is all about feminism, going back to its roots of how do we diminish the man in Western society in particular, and in this case, American society. Is that to say that there are not some crazy and messed up folks, male in American society and some females as well, who are engaging and using the positions that they have vocationally so that they can actually pursue people and assault them sexually, manipulate them sexually? Are we saying that that's not happening? No. But you allow that, Jennifer Lawrence. You allow that, Hollywood. You allow that. Because you know it's going on. You've known it's been going on for decades, but because they're willing to pay you off or give you a movie contract, or in the case of the record business, they're willing to give you a record deal, they're willing to make sure that you have material wealth. You are willing, we have set the price for your soul, your integrity, and your character. But now all of a sudden, since Harvey Weinstein's gone, it's time to speak up. Really? I mentioned Jennifer Lawrence because, of course, since this started in Hollywood, all of Hollywood is out there. Even Helen, as though anybody would actually ever grab Helen, at least, well, not now they wouldn't, but she's out there declaring it. Everyone is out there talking about it. But in this case, here is Jennifer Lawrence and Reese Witherspoon, speaking about their experiences.
When I was much younger and starting out, I was told by the producers of a film to lose 15 pounds in 2 weeks. Super easy. One girl before me had already been fired for not losing enough weight fast enough. And during this time, a female producer had me do a nude lineup with about 5 women who were much, much thinner than me. And we all stood side by side with only paste-ons covering our privates. After that degrading and humiliating lineup, the female producer told me I should use the naked photos of myself as inspiration for my diet.
I have my own experiences that have come back to me very vividly, and I found it really hard to sleep, hard to think, hard to communicate. A lot of the feelings I've been having about anxiety, about being honest, the guilt for not speaking up earlier or taking action, true disgust at the director who assaulted me when I was 16 years old, and anger that I felt at the agents and the producer.
All the guilt, all the anger, all the other things which you assuaged with money and fame. Period. You were willing to suffer the wrong and allow that same wrong to be perpetrated upon others because you were paid. Call it what it is. You're hypocrites. You're not heroes now. You were hypocrites then, and you're bandwagon jumpers now. And at the end of the day, what are you going to change? Are you going to take a knee on the film industry and not participate? No. Are you going to turn down a contract where they say if you play this role in a movie, we're going to pay you so much money, and oh, by the way, the director or the producer really wants you to come by and read for him personally up in his hotel room so he can really get a sense of how you are in the character? Are you going to say no? Oh, well, I'm Jennifer Lawrence. Now, okay, well, fine. Well, you won't get this role. After a while, you don't get enough roles. It doesn't matter what your name is. Are you going to take your character? Are you going to try to teach others coming up behind you that they should not do these things if it's going to cost them their dignity? Are you going to do that because you haven't done it so far? You're just not being very compassionate. No, I have compassion for everybody. I also have compassion for everybody with a Y chromosome who's getting painted with this broad brush, who have never even considered doing anything untoward toward a woman. I'm compassionate toward everyone who has to deal with being accused of something And the assumption is because a woman said you did it, then you must be guilty. I have compassion for that person as well. Well, what about your compassion for the victim? Bring the charges and let's prove that there was victimhood, and then we can make sure that someone is punished and that there is justice and that that person will never do it again, and others can see that that behavior is not tolerated. A bunch of women talking about Me Too. If that was going to move the needle, then Harvey Weinstein would never have existed. This is nonsense. You want to know what this is? Oh, by the way, D.C. didn't miss their opportunity. NBC put out a story on the 22nd of October. Women of the Senate share their Me Too stories of harassment. The Harvey Weinstein story reminded us of the ugliness, the humiliation, and perhaps most importantly, the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault, another blanket indictment against men. In response, women took to social media and began telling their stories using the hashtag #MeToo. Now, even some of the most powerful women in government are saying Me Too. Meet the Press asked every female member of the Senate, all 21, if they would share stories they might have of sexual harassment. 4 senators, all Democrats, shock and amazement, said yes. And they did. I'm not going to play all that. Just know that, not surprisingly, one of them was Pocahontas. Not surprisingly, one of them was Hiawatha. Not surprisingly, one of them was, of course, Elizabeth Warren. Because this is what they do. They are after people who don't agree with them, who don't think like them. And the way you do it, since they can't stand up to them on merit, they seek to assassinate their character. And with these widespread stories of unproven sexual harassment and allegations that there is a rape culture that exists, what you do is preemptively attack the character of every man who is striving to be powerful in any profession. And you're okay with that? You shouldn't be. It's wrong. It's simply wrong. And these women were so humiliated. It was done to them in such an ugly manner, and it was so unbearable that they are now sitting United States senators. That doesn't register with you, huh? It does with me. I don't believe what you have not proven. I will say it quite frankly. Are you saying there's no sexual harassment? I didn't say there's no sexual harassment, but I'm not going to believe what you have not proven. If you are accusing people of what are now crimes, then prove it. If you're not going to prove it, I'm not going to entertain it, because in this country, people remain innocent until proven guilty, not simply alleged of wrongdoing. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism. TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. We're going to end up the hour on this. Someone finally answers for killing a black man, and it happened in the state of Alabama.
Alabama executed a man who was convicted of killing a police officer 20 years ago. Tory McNabb's lawyers had tried to stop the execution since he was suing the state over its lethal injection program. McNabb's family and attorneys witnessed the execution and expressed concern that he was still conscious because he had moved. Prison officials say nothing unusual happened.
I've witnessed several of these executions, and involuntary movement is not uncommon. And that's how I would categorize it or characterize it in just the way that you have, is just an involuntary movement. Per the protocol, it's a judgment call, and we always err on the side of safety. And so, yes, we did perform 2 consciousness checks.
McNabb was convicted of killing Montgomery police officer Anderson Gordon in 1997, shooting him 5 times. Shirley Smith, The Associated Press.
Well, that was a very clean and professional recounting of the highlights, if you will, of an execution. Tory Twain McNabb, 40 years old, used his last statement before they did the execution to tell his mother and sister that he was unafraid, and he cursed at the state, saying, "I hate you, I hate you." As the procedure began, he raised his middle fingers, both of them, before becoming still. He was pronounced dead at 9:38 Central Daylight Time, 9:38 p.m. That was back on Thursday, which would have been the 19th of October. McNabb was convicted of killing Montgomery police officer Anderson Gordon, a black man, in 1997. Prosecutors say McNabb shot Gordon 5 times as the officer sat in his patrol car after arriving at a traffic accident McNabb caused while fleeing a bail bondsman. The U.S. Supreme Court delayed the execution for several hours to consider McNabb's request for a stay, but ruled that the execution could go forward. "Mom, sis," this is McNabb speaking, "look at my eyes. I got no tears. I am unafraid. To the state of Alabama, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." And those were his final words. I am, and I'll say it just as clearly as I can, I am ecstatic that justice was done in the murder of a black man. I am ecstatic that the proper penalty was both decreed and assessed against the murderer of a black man. I am ecstatic that someone died for murdering a black man. Period. I'm not trying to hear the fraudulent police brutality epidemic nonsense that those who ignore the death culture that blacks have in their own community want to throw up so that they can make excuses for people like Tory Twain McNabb. Now, do the majority of black people do that? I'd like to say no, but it really doesn't matter. The fact that one would is enough of a problem. Nevertheless, we all know these people are going to have their say. They're going to jump up and down and scream about how this was wrong for them to do this, and they're going to talk about how the death penalty and, what they did, he moved, that was cruel and unusual. Excuse me, what about those 5 bullets he pumped into somebody when he was fleeing? He was fleeing a bail bondsman. What does that tell you about his situation? And he's got a gun while he's fleeing a bail. How many illegalities do you need? I am, and I say this with full knowledge of what I'm speaking, I am ecstatic for the people of Alabama that Tory Twain McNabb is no longer among the living in their state, that he can do no more harm to black people in that state. I am ecstatic that someone like Tory Twain McNabb, who showed about as much remorse as an alley cat covering his 20th female in a night, is gone. And I wish that we could have that penalty assessed to everyone who murders black people in this country, particularly those who senselessly murder, indiscriminately murder children who are doing their homework and catch a round from a drive-by. We shouldn't even bother with we have to bother with the process of trial, but there should not be the bother of an appeal in my opinion, but that's just an opinion. Why am I so happy about this, one might ask? Well, here's a simple fact. Because people like to bring up the police brutality issue and blacks getting murdered, even though blacks die less at the hands of law enforcement than whites. And the numbers aren't even close. But the reporting ignores what happens to whites. They don't report. Here's the thing. If you took all the stories about police brutality and people dying at the hands of police and you started to report with the white deaths first, you wouldn't get to the black death. If you did one white death every day and then said we're going to do all the white people who die every day and then we're going to talk about the black people, you would never talk about the black people. That said, the simple fact is this. Whenever law enforcement kills anyone, the killer is identified, examined, and the case is adjudicated. We're not talking about whether or not he's convicted. We're talking about the whole thing is, okay, we know who did it. We're going to look at what happened, and we're going to come to a conclusion in accordance with law. Happens literally every time. However, there's this place called Chicago, and they just came off a record year of homicides. Back on the 3rd of January, Fox News logged this report regarding a interaction between the incoming president and the current mayor of Chicago about those homicides.
It has been a record year in the city of Chicago, and for all the wrong reasons. The murder rate has never been higher. President-elect Donald Trump taking to Twitter to comment about Chicago's rising number of homicides. Mr. Trump mentioning the Chicago mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who he met with in person weeks ago in New York. Tweeting this, Chicago murder rate is record-setting, 4,331 shooting victims with 762 murders in 2016. If mayor can't do it, he must ask for federal help. Matt Finn live in Chicago with more on this story. And Matt, good morning there.
Good morning, Bill. Well, Donald Trump launching another direct attack on Twitter, this time against Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Also interesting to see the president-elect already addressing Chicago's violent crime, considering this is President Obama's hometown, and the city's crime rate is something the president often did not talk about. Now, taking a look at these staggering numbers, 762 people murdered in the city of Chicago in 2016. That's more than L.A. and New York combined. An average of 2 people killed in the city per day. You could see that number has skyrocketed from 468 murders last year, wiping to the number of people shot in Chicago. 4,331 people shot in the city last year in 2016, a major increase from about 2,400 people shot in 2014. Since the start of 2017, a few days ago, 4 people have already been shot and killed in the city. The Chicago mayor's spokesperson released a statement in response to that Donald Trump tweet saying, quote, "As the president-elect knows from his conversation with the mayor, we agree the federal government has a strong role to play in public safety. We are heartened he is taking the issue seriously and look forward to working with the new administration on these important efforts." Now, on the other side of all this, there are, of course, have been numerous incidents of alleged Chicago police brutality caught on tape, one officer even being charged with murder last year. Currently, CPD is under investigation by the Department of Justice. That investigation could wrap up this month and determine if there are any type of alleged racism or brutality in the department similar to Ferguson. Bill?
A year to forget for Chicago. Matt Finn, thank you. They're live today in the Midwest. Thank you, Matt.
So you get that Donald Trump wanted something to be done in Chicago. And notice he didn't say, I'm coming in. He said, if you can't get it done, you need to ask for help. He recognized, even with the concern he chose to express, and I'll call it concern, that he is not at liberty to simply roll federal troops or federal resources into that city. He needs to ask for help. It probably needs to go through the state, all that. Still, in addition to the record number of people being killed, here's why I was so ecstatic about Tory McNabb being executed for killing a black man. WBEZ 91.5 in Chicago.org ran a story back on the 26th of January. Chicago's murder clearance rate falls to a historic low. The Chicago Police Department last year, talking about 2016, saw fewer cases than 1 in 5 murders committed, the lowest rate for that crime in at least a half century, according to new police figures. They cleared in 2016 of 760 plus murders, they cleared only 151, means only 151 people were even arrested. And that's down from 2015, where the rate was only 25.4, only 1 in 4. So let me make sure we get this very clear. If you're a police officer and you kill somebody, you're going to answer for it. Simple as that. But if you're in a place like Chicago and you kill somebody, there's an better than 80% chance that you will remain anonymous, and that person will simply be buried, and no one will ever be held accountable. And oh, by the way, 763 murders, it would take the cops more than 2 years to kill that many black people, probably be more than 3, and that's across the country, and you're killing that many folks in Chicago per year, 1 year. And I don't see anybody taking a knee for this. I don't see anybody protesting on a sideline for this. I don't see anybody coming up with a t-shirt or socks or any of that regarding this matter. Nobody answers for killing black people except police officers. They're never held to account. They're never even examined. But all black people want to talk about is what somebody who's not black is doing. And all the while, the blood flows and nobody is ever made accountable for it. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
The ongoing saga of NFL kneelers, flag burners, and disrespecters of America in general represent a lot more than a simple lack of respect for our republic or Old Glory. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, for the millions of us Americans who, like the Founding Fathers, believe that the United States was divinely appointed to be an exceptional nation of greatness as the sweet land of liberty and a place we love. Please do not get your noses bent out of joint if we are not fans of protests by millionaire football players who feel oppressed. Some of us understand that the history behind the national anthem to be an inspired song that literally carries God's frequency of love for America. The national anthem happens to be a declaration of freedom and victory over the forces of evil that would destroy liberty and justice for all. I was a little boy when leftists persuaded so-called church leaders to no longer allow the singing of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is another song that carries the frequencies of God and is a song of freedom, liberty, and victory. The United States will soon see a resurgence of America, one nation under God, with liberty, justice, and opportunity for all Americans and legal immigrants. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy here with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC Talk 107.5 in North Florida, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Bo Bergdahl is finally going to get his day of reckoning. For those who do not recall, in 2009, while stationed in Afghanistan, Bo Bergdahl turned up missing. There was subsequently, in 2014, then President Barack Obama made a deal to have him return because once he went missing, he turned up in captivity, and he was there for 5 years. After 5 years, Barack Obama managed to get him out and had a very interesting Rose Garden ceremony regarding the event.
This morning, I called Bob and Janie Bergdahl and told them that after nearly 5 years in captivity, their son Bo is coming home. Sergeant Bergdahl has missed birthdays and holidays and the simple moments with family and friends, which all of us take for granted. But while Bo was gone, he was never forgotten. As part of this effort, the United States is transferring 5 detainees from the prison in Guantanamo Bay to Qatar. The Qatari government has given us assurances that it will put in place measures to protect our national security.
I'd like to say to Bo right now, who's having trouble speaking English, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Zayabayim. I'm your father, Bo. The people of Afghanistan, the same. Khalifa al-Thani, the complicated nature of this recovery will never really be comprehended. To each and every single one who affected this in this country, in the service branches, at the State Department, throughout the whole of American government, and around the world at international governments around the world. Thank you so much. We just can't communicate the words this morning when we heard from the President. So we look forward to continuing the recovery of our son, which is going to be a considerable task for our family, and we hope that the media will understand that will keep us very preoccupied in the coming days and weeks as he gets back home to the United States. Thank you all for being here very much.
And there you have Barack Obama welcoming home a U.S. soldier who had been held in captivity. That was back in June of 2014. That same day, I believe it was a Sunday, but that same day or that same weekend, Susan Rice, who after Benghazi, I guess, had become the designated Sunday show propagandist in chief, showed up on the ABC Sunday morning news show with George Stephanopoulos and had this, among other things, to say about Bo Bergdahl.
As you've seen the criticism already coming in, Martha Raddatz mentioned some of it from Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. We also have the top Republicans on the Armed Services Committee saying this is going to put Americans at risk, threaten American lives because you broke the policy of trading with terrorists. What's your reaction to that?
Well, George, this is a very special situation. Sergeant Bergdahl wasn't simply a hostage. He was an American prisoner of war captured on the battlefield. We have a sacred obligation that we have upheld since the founding of our republic to do our utmost to bring back our men and women who were taken in battle. And we did that in this instance. If for some reason we took a position now in the 21st century when some of our adversaries may not be traditional state actors, that we would not do our utmost to bring our prisoners of war home, that would break faith with the American people and with the men and women who serve in uniform. So regardless of who may be holding an American prisoner of war, we must do our best to bring him or her back.
Those are some of the best sounding words you can imagine. She also went on to say that Bo Bergdahl served with honor and distinction. The problem became when those words reached the ears of those who had actually served with Bo Bergdahl, and they had their say. And a few days later, just a few days, 2 or 3 days after she appeared on Sunday's show talking about honor and distinction, she was caught in this situation.
I realize there's been a lot of discussion and controversy around this, but what I was referring to is the fact that this was a young man who volunteered to serve his country in uniform at a time of war. That is itself a very honorable thing. But honor and distinction. Jim, really, I mean, this is a young man whose circumstances we are still going to learn about. He is, as all Americans, innocent until proven guilty. He's now being tried in the court of public opinion after having gone through an enormously traumatic 5 years of captivity. His parents the same. I think what we need to care most about is his health and well-being and recovery. There'll be an opportunity, and the military has committed to review the circumstances of his capture. If there is a consequence that results from that, that will be delivered. But in the meantime, let's remember, this is a young man who volunteered to serve his country. He was taken as a prisoner of war. He suffered in captivity. He's now trying to begin the process of recovery. Let's let that happen, and then let's know the facts, including his side of the story, and then we can make a judgment.
Prisoner of war. Okay. Captured on the battlefield. That seems to be the rub. And she said that on the Sunday news shows, and she doubled down in that interview that you just heard. Then in March of 2015, we have this report, which was logged by Western journalism.
The Army has charged Sergeant Bo Bergdahl with desertion and misbehavior before the enemy after walking away from his post in Afghanistan in 2009. President Obama had arranged to swap 5 Taliban terrorists from Guantanamo Bay for Bergdahl last May without notifying Congress.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity.
White House officials justify the prisoner swap by touting Bergdahl's heroism.
He's going to be safely reunited with his family. He served the United States with honor and distinction.
SBC Cody Full gave testimony that his former platoon mate, Bergdahl, had indeed deserted his post and endangered the lives of all those who searched for him.
The facts tell me that Bergdahl desertion was premeditated. Bo Bergdahl should not be characterized as having served with honor and distinction.
Donna Brazil insisted that a Republican public relations firm was using Bergdahl to make President Obama look bad, as if he needs any help.
PR campaign by Republican professionals. Yes, it was.
Twitter has hit a nerve after the vice chair of the DNC has been shown her own words about Bergdahl. Will you be apologizing to Bergdahl's platoon mates? I seem to recall you calling them liars. Have you ever admitted you were wrong about anything? Being progressive means never saying you're sorry. 5 stone-cold Taliban killers were released from Gitmo in exchange for an American soldier who voluntarily deserted his post to join the enemy. Yet when Marine Sergeant Andrew Tamaresi accidentally crossed the Mexican border and declared that he was in possession of firearms, he was in prison for 214 days without any assistance from the president. So much for no man left behind. That's our news brief for today. Thanks for joining me.
That was brutal, but none of it was untrue. I find it interesting, the president's words, no matter the circumstances, but just days before, or when it all came out that you had gotten and done this release against the Council of U.S. Generals, by the way, He was a hero who had served with distinction. And now when the truth came out, it now becomes, well, whatever reason he was there, we got to get him back. No, you don't. No, you don't. And oh, by the way, in addition to the 5 cold-blooded killers that were traded from Guantanamo Bay's detention facility, Barack Obama sent $5 billion in cash. It's like one of the most ridiculous trades you can ever. We'll give you 5 top draft picks plus $5 billion in cash if you give us 1 deserter. So he didn't serve with distinction. He wasn't captured. What else is going on? Maybe it's this.
Bo Bergdahl admitting he's a deserter. The former U.S. soldier pleading guilty to walking off his base before being captured by the Taliban. What punishments could he face for his crimes? That's the big question.
Yeah, here now to tell us is a former Navy JAG officer, Brian Bouffard. Brian, thanks so much for coming on this morning. We'll jump right into it here. He's potentially going to see life in prison for this. Do you think he gets that? Obviously, he spent 5 years in captivity already.
He did, and no, I don't. I don't think that he gets anything close to that, although it is legally possible, as you say.
Brian, here's where people are having a hard time, in my opinion anyway. Here's someone who for years has been saying this isn't true, I haven't done this. I'm not quoting here, but now he's pleading guilty. So when you plead guilty, you're essentially saying this is what I did. How is he going to handle this in court?
Well, yesterday he had his plea, and in the military system, you have to personally convince the military judge that you are, in fact, guilty of what you're pleading to. So if, in fact, he had his pleas to desertion accepted by the judge, that means that he had to admit that when he left, he had the intent to stay away permanently, to never come back. And that is certainly at odds with what he has been saying for months now.
Well, Brian, my big question is there's such a disparity between how some people view this entire case. You've got the president and a lot of members of the military saying we should have left him there. We'd never trade for a traitor and all of these other things. And then you've got, you've got the former administration that threw a ceremony for him when they got him back and traded 5 of our worst that were sitting in Gitmo Bay for him. How is there such a disparity in how people view this story? Where is the real story?
That's a great question, and I think that's you can say that about a lot of issues that are swirling in our country today. Right now, I mean, everybody has different views on lots of things. This particular case, again, if you believe what apparently has been brought to light, when he left, he intended to desert. Now, was he a traitor? Did he intend to join the Taliban? We've speculated about that, but I've seen no evidence of that or heard no evidence of that.
In your opinion, how much time do you think he'll get? And also, do you think he'll receive a dishonorable charge, and with that comes along with losing things like your benefits?
Yeah, I think either a dishonorable discharge or maybe less likely a bad conduct discharge. I think that's definitely in the cards for him. But confinement is the big issue. And starting on Monday when he has his sentencing hearing, it's the government's job to show why that should be a high sentence, and it's the defense's job to show why it should be a lower sentence. But certainly the fact that he spent 5 years in torturous captivity is certainly extenuation and mitigation of his offense, and the judge is going to consider that.
So do you think he gets life?
I don't think he gets life. No. I really don't.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. It's going to happen pretty fast. So we just got one guy deciding it. All right, Brian, thanks so much.
One guy deciding it. I want you to go back to something that was said in that clip. For his plea to be accepted by a military judge, he had to convince the military judge that what he was saying was sincere. KOMOnews.com put this out regarding that very thing. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, 5 years a Taliban captive after abandoning his post in Afghanistan. Remember, the Obama administration called him a hero who was captured after serving with honor and distinction. He pleaded guilty to desertion and misbehavior before the enemy. I understand that leaving was against the law, said Bergdahl, who admitted guilt without striking a deal with prosecutors, leaving his punishment up to a military judge. There's no plea bargain. I did it. I am at the mercy of the court. The guilty pleas bring the highly publicized or politicized saga closer to an end. 8 years after Bergdahl vanished, President Barack Obama brought him home in 2014 in a swap for 5 Taliban prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, saying the U.S. does not leave its service members on the battlefield. The judge decided after, and this was interesting because Donald Trump during the campaign called him a dirty, rotten traitor who deserved to be executed before a firing squad or thrown out of a plane without a parachute. The judge decided that those comments, though disturbing and disappointing, did not constitute unlawful command influence by the soon-to-be commander-in-chief. No, it didn't. There were you got to understand something. People who thought Bo Bergdahl was a traitor, they were of that mindset well before Donald Trump announced his candidacy. Bergdahl, now 31, told the judge, Colonel Jeffrey R. Nance, on Monday that he now understands his decision to walk off his remote post in 2009 prompted intense search and recovery missions, during which some service members were seriously wounded. After Bergdahl said he understands that he could be sentenced to life in prison, Nance accepted his pleas. Wow. So what we have here is another exposing of the Islamist bathhouse queen, also known as Barack Hussein Obama. He did it to you again. He put 5 terrorists in play against America. And what did America get for it? Nothing. Nothing. You cannot tell me that deserters have great value. They don't. $5 billion in taxpayer money to put 5 high-value terrorists back on the loose. And trust me, they are doing what they want to do, which is wreaking havoc. For those who beat the drum saying Barack Obama should be tried, should be charged, should be held accountable, these are the type of situations that warrant that. He wasn't misinformed. He did exactly what he wanted. He was supposed to bring this before Congress, and because he didn't want that scrutiny, he did not. And the only reason that makes sense is Barack Obama is not concerned about the welfare of the United States. And you could make the argument that for 8 years as President of the United States, he did nothing to benefit the nation. This, though, was particularly egregious and harmful. And we may not know how harmful for years to come because of the 5 people he turned loose in the world who are hostile against this country. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 in Valdosta, Georgia. Also WJHC Talk 107.5 in North Florida. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Chicago, or Chi-raq as it has also been nicknamed, is still waiting for someone to take a knee over what's going on there. As we all know, for the past year and a half, the focus has been on shenanigans in the NFL that mean absolutely nothing. Nothing. In the meantime, in the city of Chicago, they are stacking bodies like cordwood, particularly in the Black and Hispanic or Latino sections of that city. And no one is talking about the oppression of people in a city where at least 2 people were murdered for every day of 2016. As a matter of fact, here in 2017, we already know that they're on a pace to break last year's record.
As the summer in Chicago presses forward, homicides in the city remain on pace to pass the record-breaking numbers from 2016. As of the end of July, Chicago has seen 407 homicides, 4 more than this time last year. However, the actual number of shootings has gone down by about 13%, which ultimately means that while more people have died from shootings, less people are being shot. What hasn't changed, though, is the concentration of violence in certain neighborhoods. The Austin neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, just 7 square miles, has had 47 homicides this year. That's nearly 12% of the total. But something to keep in mind about Chicago, per capita, there are several cities with higher homicide rates. Nearby Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Detroit all have higher homicide rates than Chicago. Similarly, violence across the country is still much lower than it was in the 80s and 90s. Projections for the 2017 U.S. homicide rate are more than 40% lower than any time in the early 90s.
They are setting records for homicides in Chicago. This, despite the fact that the number of shootings, the people just getting wounded, well, that's not so bad, but they're still killing more people. Despite the fact that overall crime in the nation, violent crime also, is down, it is still at a record-setting pace in Chicago. Let me tell you what oppression looks like when every day 2 people are going to be killed extrajudiciously, or judicially, as they like to say, and the police have nothing to do with it. That's oppression. When it's not safe for you to walk outside your house. Well, they're just killing gang members. Tell that to the people who's... Remember that girl who sang at the second inaugural for Barack Obama, then went back to Chicago and got capped? I guess she was part of a gang? No. She wasn't. And as this has gone on, that was back at the end of July. By the end of September, you had this going on. And let me preface this. Almost the only major news organization that even talks about violence in Chicago happens to be Fox. Not because it's not happening. And I guarantee you, if 760 people were killed in a city that was run by Republicans, that would be headline news on CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, and every other left-leaning news organization. But again, as September rolled around, after we got to the end of July and we had crossed over the 400 mark and had killed more people by that time in July of 2017 this year than had been killed in 2016, here's where we are in September of 2017.
Chicago hitting a grim milestone of more than 500 homicides this year, according to the Chicago Tribune. That has forced the city to deploy 100 new police officers. But Rahm Emanuel spent Monday speaking about climate change and attacking the president, saying his unpopularity is making his job easier politically. Here to react to this is retired Chicago Police Sergeant Peter Kokonis. Good morning, Sergeant. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So what is your reaction to this when he is at a conference speaking about climate change when 500 people so far have died this year in Chicago?
And plus, we're on a rate to hit 800 carjackings, violent crimes. It's like a bait and switch. He's over there talking about climate change, which is an important issue, but in his city, people are dying. There's pools of blood. 4 people were just assassinated by an assault rifle, one of them being a pregnant young lady. There's a guerrilla warfare going on in a Latino neighborhood between 2 gangs, and he's talking about the weather.
When is he up for re-election? And what do you foresee?
2019.
So in his future, what do you think will happen? Do folks in Chicago care about this, or do they love him?
Oh, no, he's not a loved guy. He closed 50 schools in minority neighborhoods, forcing kids to walk through gang-infested neighborhoods. He's taken, he says, I put 100 more policemen on the street. As of August, 448 have retired. The figures show that 499 have applied to retire. So, I don't know what kind of math people use, but if you put 100 out and 448 leave, your districts are still stripped bare, and they're beyond the strength that they need. And the people that need them, the Inglewood neighborhoods, the Garfield Park, the Brighton Park, where all these homicides are going on, are woefully short of protection. So what do you do? And him saying that Donald Trump is less popular than him, I can't believe that.
What do you think he needs
Trump
to
maybe
do?
didn't do well in the election here, but I assure you, Emmanuel's pulled out all stops trying to get reelected.
What would you advise him if he's watching this morning? What would you say to him? How would you clean up Chicago?
Well, if I'm talking to the president, Mr. President, send people here to help. Put boots on the ground here. If I'm the mayor, if I'm advising the mayor, get out, retire, take your money and run, and let somebody that really cares about the city and the people, let him or her run this city. You can't just scream about climate when you got bodies being, and this isn't just something that just happened. This has been 5 years into his career. Mm-hmm. He's always blaming somebody. Woman embezzles $200 and some thousand from or $20 million from the school system. His handpicked person.
Mm-hmm. Sergeant Kokonis.
His pick of people in departments is horrible. It's just not working.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your opinion. Thank you for serving. We appreciate it.
Let's recap. Rahm Emanuel took credit for putting an extra 100 policemen on the street. That's not an insignificant number for any city, by the way. But he did that as 448 police officers retired. That meant he actually lost 348 police officers. If adding 100 police officers is a significant improvement for law enforcement, losing net 348 police officers is an even greater detriment to law enforcement. And as the good sergeant just reported, 499 to be exact, but another 500 police officers have applied for retirement. So that means you're going to be down 847 police officers. And are you going to hire that many back? And you're setting records for homicides, and you're setting records for carjackings, and your conversation, instead of dealing with that, is to talk about how unpopular Donald Trump is and climate change while you're stacking bodies like cordwood. Where is the NFL? Where are all these woke people, all these black athletes, all these people who have all this social conscience and want to take a knee over police slayings, and they're ignoring more than 1,200 people shot and killed in Chicago in 2 years, last year being more than 760, and they're on pace this year to go above that. If you're going to take a knee regarding black oppression in these United States, somebody ought to be on both knees for Chicago's homicide problem, for which the government of that city and of the state of Illinois have chosen to do absolutely nothing. You close 50 schools in minority communities, and thereby you are making children have to walk through gang territory to get to schools, when gang territory is where a significant portion of all the shootings and killings occur, but you care about the city. Nobody's taking any. This is foolishness. Oh, by the way, when we talk about why all this is going on, let's remember the guy who started it all. Colin Kaepernick, the whitest half-black man that I've ever seen in my life, and all of a sudden he starts sleeping with the only heterosexual woman in the Black Lives Matter movement, and now he has conscience. He's got conscience now. Man, I'm hearing Jimmy Buffett in the background saying, some people claim there's a woman to blame. Yes, there is. This isn't about what he thinks. This is about him continuing to hit Nessa. But this is his reason when he was asked, well, why are you standing? What's this all about?
What would you like this, to be the end of the game for you?
That's basically. Ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust. People aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for: freedom, liberty, justice for all, and it's not happening for all right now.
Is there something that's evolved as a philosophy in your mind, and how has this kind of progressed that you made a stand like this?
It's something that I've seen, I've felt, wasn't quite sure how to deal with originally, and it is something that's evolved. It's something as I've gained more knowledge about, what's going on in this country in the past, what's going on currently. These aren't new situations. This isn't new ground. It's things that have gone on in this country for years and years and have never been addressed, and they need to be.
Colin,
Yes, I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed. To me, this is something that has to change. And when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand. Specifically.
You heard the last part, someone trying to ask him specifically, because in that whole clip, you still have no idea what it is that he wants. Well, when things change, what does change mean? What does it look like? People aren't being represented, and really? Now, you can find other clips where he wants to talk about police. If you want to talk about people not being treated properly and things needing to change. Now, let's be honest here. Colin Kaepernick doesn't really matter anymore. The dummy got himself out of the league with no re-entry key. He locked himself outside the house and left the key inside. Nobody is interested in touching him right now. Not in this country. Maybe he can go play in Canada, rehabilitate himself, make himself a better quarterback for one. But where is LeBron James? You heard that there are higher murder rates in Milwaukee, Detroit, and St. Louis. Detroit and St. Louis are majority black cities. Milwaukee has a plurality of black people. There are more blacks in Milwaukee than anyone else, but they're not the majority of the population. Where are the people who claim that the police are such a problem? Where are they in these murder capitals of the United States where it is almost totally black killing black? And I cannot think of anything more oppressive to happen to a person of color than being murdered. Can you? But there's no discussion about that. People are worried about, I want to express my rights and use my platform. About what? You're not doing a thing to keep the bodies from being stacked up in Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, St. Louis. We can go on. Let's not leave out Baltimore. But it's not happening. Because at the end of the day, it really is not what you think it is. Colin Kaepernick started his protest because he was sleeping with somebody. End of discussion. Didn't know nothing about it until she started filling his head in more ways than one. And these other folks who are following behind him and emulating him, they don't know anything either. They have just as much of an end game that they can describe as Colin Kaepernick did when the microphone was in his face. They don't know. And when pressed, they repeat the lie. Well, police are murdering people. No, they're not. Blacks are murdering people. And blacks are murdering 30 times the number of blacks that police will kill. And blacks are killing 3 to 4 times the number of black people in Chicago that police will kill across the nation in a given year. And it's accelerating. But you don't think that's oppression. When people are afraid to walk to school, afraid to go to work, afraid to even go outside their house, but that's not oppression. Oppression is some white guy who's not thinking about them, who has his own problems, but he's got supremacy. So supremacy to what? If he had supremacy, he wouldn't have bills. I'm still waiting for some of these privileged millionaires who are so concerned about black people and their welfare to stand up for the welfare of black people who live in killing zones. Until they do, I don't give a rat's behind what you have to say. And in case you haven't noticed, the country has stopped listening as well. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show, and we're going to talk about that tiresome tax reform lie. And we're there again. You know how it goes when there is someone as a member of the Republican Party in the White House, and there are Republicans running the Senate and Republicans running the House. It must be time to talk about tax reform. Nothing wrong with that. Wasn't always that way. But we're getting lied to. We get repeated lies about what goes on with taxes. And it all comes back to the evil of progressive ideology. Let's start by having a discussion about taxes. The Heritage Foundation put out a document that actually showed what happened with tax rates over the history of the United States. Remember, federal income taxes were only deemed constitutional after 1913. Couldn't do it before then. And 4 times in the history of America to date, tax rates, income tax rates, federal income tax rates were lowered significantly. In the 1920s, they were slashed from being well above 70% to 25%. Think about that. Top tax rate drops from more than 70% down to 25%. What happened? Personal income tax revenues increased by 61%. They paid down about a third of the national debt, not the deficit, the debt. That was from lower taxes because it produced higher incomes for people and therefore higher revenues for the government. In 1962, President Kennedy, more than a year before he was taken out, had this to say about taxation and the American economy.
The worst deficit comes from a recession. And if we can take the proper action in the proper time, this can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession. That is the right kind of a tax cut, both for your family budget and the national budget, resulting from a permanent basic reform and reduction in our rate structure, a creative tax cut creating more jobs and income, and eventually more revenue. And the right time for that kind of bill, it now appears, in the absence of an economic crisis today, and if the job is to be done in a responsible way, is January 1963. Such a bill will be presented to the Congress for action next year. It will include an across-the-board, top-to-bottom cut in both corporate and personal income taxes. It will include long-needed tax reform that logic and equity demand. And it will date that cut in taxes to take effect as of the start of next year, January 1963. The billions of dollars this bill will place in the hands of the consumer and our businessmen will have both immediate and permanent benefits to our economy. Every dollar released from taxation that is spent or invested will help create a new job and a new salary. And these new jobs and new salaries can create other jobs and other salaries, and more customers and more growth for an expanding American economy. Instead of being permanently saddled with excess planned capacity and the budgetary deficit that is created by this means, our goal must be fuller capacity and full employment and the budgetary surpluses that that kind of employment and capacity can produce.
So what happened with the Kennedy tax cut? Let's recall something. When John Kennedy took office, the top tax rate in this country was 91%. 91%. If you made, I'm just talking about for you being, I was just talking about married filing separately or single, which is the same as married filing separately. If you, every dollar you made over $200,000 was taxed at 91%. The lowest tax rate was 20%. That was the lowest tax rate. You were going to pay 20% on any amount from zero up to $2,000 in 1963. They phased in the tax cut over 2 years. You went to a top rate of 77 in 64 and a bottom rate of 16%. And by 1965, they had phased it totally in. Top marginal rate had gone all the way from 91 all the way down to 70. The bottom rate from 20 down to 14. What was the effect of that? Well, tax revenues climbed by 62%. Why was that significant? Because what did you have going on in the 1960s that cost money? Oh, we had a space program that put a man on the moon by the end of that decade. Do you think that cost more or less money? We had a war on Vietnam that was going to ramp up throughout the 1960s. Do you think that cost more or less money? We announced a war on poverty that didn't work, but it cost an arm and a leg. And all that was financed throughout the 1960s with a tax cut. Let's talk about the Reagan tax cuts. When Ronald Reagan came into office, we still pretty much had the tax rates of John Kennedy. Now, granted, our good friend Bill Clinton had pushed through an enormous tax increase, but that was after Reagan. When Reagan came in, the rates were still sitting at the top 70%. Let me just fast forward this for you. Top rate was 70% when Reagan came into office. And there were, I believe, 13 tax brackets. When Ronald Reagan left office, there were two. 15 and 28. 15% and 28. What happened to the American economy during the 1980s? Ridiculous. What happened to tax revenues during the 1980s? They climbed by 54%. You have to recognize what's going on here. In the 2000s, we had this statement from President George W. Bush, Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, and Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
Today, I am sending to Congress my plan to provide relief to all income taxpayers, which I believe will help jumpstart the American economy. We must give overcharged taxpayers some of their own money back. A president should not wait on events. He must try to shape them. And the warning signs are clear. All of us here in Washington, the President and the Congress, are responsible to confront the danger of an economic slowdown and to blunt its effects.
What we're talking about is the American people being able to keep more of their money. It is their money. It's not the Washington government's money. And we believe the American people can make a better decision about how to use their money for the benefit of their families.
This will be a great partnership between the House and the Senate, and the great part of this partnership is finally we have a president on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue that will sign the bill.
What happened because of that president signing the bill? Let's just talk about revenue, shall we? They said, well, the economy fell apart under Bush. That wasn't because of taxes. That had everything to do with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and mortgages, not taxes. Let's talk about tax revenues. In 2000, fiscal year 2000, tax revenues were $2.03 trillion. But by 2004, they had fallen to $1.88 trillion. And the year before that, they hit a trough of $1.72 trillion. That was the clearest sign that you were in a recession. And taxes were cut. The next year, after the second Bush tax cut in 2005, they took in $2.15 trillion, which is more than was taken in any year of the Clinton administration when everybody believes that things were doing so well. The next year, $2.4 trillion. The next year, $2.57 trillion. And they cut taxes. Let me make this clear to you. The federal government knows that allowing you to keep more of your money puts more money in the federal coffers, but they resist cutting taxes. Why is that? Let's listen to Barack Obama's answer from the debates in 2008 when that question was put to him during a debate with Hillary Clinton and the moderator being Charlie Rose.
All right. You have, however, said you would favor an increase in the capital gains tax. As a matter of fact, you said on CNBC, and I quote, "I certainly would not go above what existed under Bill Clinton, which was 28%. It's now 15%. That's almost a doubling if you went to 28%. But actually, Bill Clinton in 1997 signed legislation that dropped the capital gains tax to 20%. Right. And George Bush has taken it down to 15%. And in each instance, when the rate dropped, revenues from the tax increased. The government took in more money. And in the 1980s, when the tax was increased to 28%, the revenues went down. So why raise it at all, especially given the fact that 100 million people in this country own stock and would be affected?
Well, Charlie, what I've said is that I would look at raising the capital gains tax for purposes of fairness. We saw an article today which showed that the top 50 hedge fund managers made $29 billion last year. $29 billion for 50 individuals. And part of what has happened is that those who are able to work the stock market and amass huge fortunes on capital gains are paying a lower tax rate than their secretaries. That's not fair.
That doesn't matter. Let me make it clear. What was said, when the rate was lower, people kept more of their money and the government took in more money. That's what matters. What progressives want you to do is evaluate tax reform by you counting somebody else's money. It's called class envy. And they work it. And that is why, you know what? There are nothing but progressives in Washington. Because Paul Ryan knows everything that I just told you, but that's not what he's trying to put forward as the reason for tax reform. The reason for tax reform is the American people should simply have the money they earn. Economic liberty is the cornerstone of this country, and we should not be talking about who gets to keep what and whether or not it's fair. It's not even fair that the government get the money, let alone determining how much of what you earn you should keep. We need to stop this foolishness. Do we need tax reform? Of course we do. Do we need to lower rates? Of course you do. Could you go back to where Reagan had them? Yeah. Matter of fact, you should go lower. Because I trust the American people to direct this nation with their money more than I trust a government that's already $20 trillion in debt. And if they need more money, we already have the framework and the blueprint. If the government wants more revenues, cut tax rates. Are they going to do it? We'll see. Why won't they do it? Do some critical thinking and you'll figure it out on your own. They can't control you if they're not deep in your pocket. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Hope to talk with you next week. Until then, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.